In this video, we will see the AP intercompany code setup process. We will talk about the business trigger, the data involved, the process and the idea screens, the output, dependent processes, and exceptions if applicable. Regarding the business trigger, we may need to do the setup of this intercompany code when we identify that there will be a company that will do purchases for another and generate an intercompany recharge. So for example, we might have the scenario where we have two companies. One is the operating company, the other is the head office company, and there's going to be an audit, say, for the operating company, and the head office company is going to be paying for that audit. When the invoice is recorded, then it's going to be a payable for the recharge, for the head office company, and a payable to the vendor, but it's also going to be recorded as a receivable, intercompany receivable from the operating company to the head office company. So the head office company is going to record that as a receivable, while the operating company is going to record debit to cost and a credit to intercompany payable. So in that case, we may need to create this intercompany code. Often we create two intercompany codes, one for receivable and one for payable. But sometimes people might use the single intercompany code for both receivable and payable for the entity, for the company's relation. Regarding the data involved, we need to know the FQA elements for the intercompany code. So at a minimum, we need to know the accounts we're going to be using for both the intercompany receivable and intercompany payable. As for organizational data, we need the ledger ID, and we also need the entities or companies in the intercompany relation. The process is to go to the AP module, the user tables, and account codes screen. We will select the ledger, we will enter the intercompany code ID and assign the FQA elements. If we have to create two intercompany code IDs, one for payable and one for receivable, we will need to assign FQA elements for both. After that's done, we can go ahead and assign the intercompany code in the intercompany entity receivable payable relation. So we need to define that for both entities, both for the receiving entity, say, and the paying entity. We need to define both sides, so both the intercompany receivable and payable for both companies in the relation. Let's look at the process in the idea screens. So we go to the AP module, we go to utilities, user tables, account codes. We select add new FQA, select the ledger. Let's call this IC intercompany 1, just as an example. We enter the FQA code. We enter the FQA code. And then we do here IC2, that's the second FQA, just as an example there. It may be a good idea to be a little bit more explicit in the naming, so intercompany and then the two entities that are being affected as an example, intercompany receivable, payable, or something of that nature. In this case, I'm just using these IC1 and IC2 codes. And after I'm done with the FQAs, I can save. Once I have saved, I can go ahead and go to the utilities screen and then entity maintenance and select my company. And here I will go to the intercompany screen, select the intercompany payable. So when we're going to O, and then select the code I just created, and then do the same for the receivable. In this case, let's assume it's going to be this code, and save. After I do that with one of the entities, I then need to do the same with the other one of the entities. So I need to set this up for both. And save. The output of this process is the AP offset is now saved and references the specific FQA elements, and this intercompany code is now assigned to the entity relation. So we can now start doing the intercompany transactions that between these two entities. In my example, 2200 and 1100. So say for example 2200 could do a purchase or pay for a purchase whose cost corresponds to entity 1100 and record the intercompany receivable, and at the same time 1100 is going to record the intercompany payable. So that is the dependency. We can now enter invoices where one entity does the purchase to the vendor and recharges the other entity. At this point, there are no exceptions identified for this process. Whenever we have this type of recharge transaction scenario, we should do the setup so that we can then automate the entries that are generated in the AP module. Thanks for viewing this video guide.